Welcome to the Starzology Astrology podcast. I'm your host, Arwynne O'Neill, and today I'm here with a special guest, my partner of 25 years, Rodger Towes, and we're going to be doing an entry in our new series on a spotlight on a planet placement. So today we're going to be talking about Mars in Leo, which he has, and we're going to get some real life examples of what that plays out like in someone's chart and what that means if you have it in your chart.
Hello, thanks for having me on your show.
Thanks for joining me. So for starters, let's talk a little bit about what Mars in Leo is. So Mars is the planet of drive, action, physicality. It's what my co-host Alison Price says gets you up off the couch. Some keywords for Mars are courage, initiative, willpower, consciously directed towards legitimate aims. And in its negative expression, it can be impatience, violence, and the improper use of force or threat. So depending on what sign you have Mars in, that will flavor the way you act in the world and what motivates you. And it can have a lot to do with your career, with how you are in relationships, especially sexual relationships. And Mars in fire signs is typically sort of the more active. I personally have Mars in Taurus, which is in its detriment, and it's known for being, as I call it, the Ferdinand the Bull placement. I, need a lot of external motivation. I'm not usually the initiator of a project, but I'm a great second in command, as I like to say. But Mars in Leo is very different. So just a little bit of keywords here. This is from the Chart Interpretation Handbook by Stephen Arroyo. And he says that Mars in Leo asserts itself dramatically, warmly, radiantly, expressively, and arrogantly. It expresses its desires colored by pride and an urge for recognition. It has initiative and drive, which are expressed confidently with creative flair and abundant vitality. And it needs to be complimented and appreciated for its physical or creative prowess, for its physical and sexual energy, which is stimulated by attention and by demonstrative generosity. And it also needs to express itself assertively and dynamically in order to achieve its desires. So this can often come across as being pushy or dominating towards others, or flamboyantly active. I'm sure that sounds a bit familiar to you.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that resonates. I for sure can be pushy in certain situations. There's definitely been a flair for the flamboyant through most of my life, I would say, which was interesting because when I was younger, I didn't really know where that came from because it was quite the opposite of what my parents were like. But from a birth chart perspective, being adopted and then having met my birth parents later in life, which probably could be a whole separate episode. Yeah, I learned a lot about, the genetic genealogy and maybe why having met my birth father and a blood brother I didn't know I had. And then having a bit of a relationship with both of them for a 10, 15 year period, it certainly opened my eyes to a lot of that. It explained why I was sort of, as I always thought, I was a bit of an outlier within my family structure. There were just simple reasons for that, I suppose.
So what would you say was an early indicator of this sort of flamboyance or flair or drive to show off Mars and Leo?
I would say two examples would be got into sports quite early, and I was a pretty good hockey player at a very young age. I went on to play professionally for a short period of time, when I was quite young in the Western Hockey League. I was very athletic at a very young age, and I tended to be very good in most school sports. So that led to, I think, a lot of competition naturally, because most of those were team sports. So it was a combination of the competition aspect of it and then just having a stage, so to speak. I found I enjoyed the performing aspect of playing, and like a lot of players, I think when people come out to watch you perform better. So there's a big part of that in my life early. And then also the alternating to that was, getting into music quite young. I played guitar when I was very young. Although I didn't stick with it. Once I got serious with sports, that kind of became my thing. Even in school, though, I'd take drama classes.
So talk a little bit about your interest in music and where that took you. We'll come back to the sports because I know that was a really big part of your youth as well.
I guess it would have started with when I was very, very young. I'm going to say preschool even. We lived in this area of Calgary called Inglewood, which is this old area down by the train tracks downtown Calgary. We lived in this little house there that my folks rented, and in order to help pay the rent, they rented our basement out a country band. We're like a local band in Calgary. I don't know that they went on to do anything or whatever, but I was exposed to like, live music that way at a very young age. And then also there was just music in my family. Like when both my parents had, large family, they all had like my dad's side, there were like 12 siblings and all.
Wow.
And although we didn't really hang out with my dad's side of the family due to another episode maybe, but he was Mennonite and my mom was a Christian, so he was kind of ostracized from his family. But when we would go to my mother's, my grandma and grandpa on that side of the family, they would all sing, and singing was like, a lot of it was like gospel music or just old German hymns and whatnot. So there was always an element of that. Typical day would be my grandfather would be making buns at 5 a.m, and they'd be cooking all day long. I know that sounds a little sexist, but that's just the way it was then. Yeah, and then it would always end up at the end of the night with them singing a bunch of really amazing songs that were, and they would all sing. My grandfather would sing bass, and then all my uncles sing tenor, and they would sing these intricate, like 4-part harmonies that were just amazing, and that always caught my attention. Even though I was never a really great singer, to this day, I don't really sing that well. I can fake it.
So when was the first time that you would say that you performed music? When you got interested in actually on stage or performing music?
I think probably like when we had the band in our basement. Again, I was really young. Like it would have been like preschool. Like I think I had just started kindergarten or something. By the time I was like 3 or 4, I think it was, my parents eventually, they got me an electric guitar, just a cheap electric guitar. And I wanted to play with the band downstairs, but obviously they were a professional band, and I was like a 4-year-old.
That's so cute.
Yeah. They would kind of let me just stand next to them when they were rehearsing and stuff, and I pretended to play, and it was... I think my desire to perform probably came later after years of playing hockey and, baseball in the summers. There were always games and practices, and even like when I was in my early teens and, playing in the Western Hockey League, it was like, people would come watch our practices. It was like, professional prospects at that point. It was kind of, there's a culture of, just like in the US, when people follow college football and basketball, and it was a high level. But I think back to your question, I think that was more the performance aspect. And I eventually kind of got into music again a little bit later.
Let's talk a little bit about hockey then, because you did go quite far into the junior league and became a little quasi-celebrity in your own realm. Yeah,
a little bit. I mean, if you Google me on prospects or whatever, NHL, or just look at my stats, it was at a time that was like pre-internet, so it was a lot of my stats aren't even accurate online. I was like a fourth liner as a young player, so I was like 16 turning 17, playing on a team that had won the Memorial Cup the year before. So all my line mates, the guys I was playing behind, were really like first round draft picks. A lot of them went on to play professional, like to play in the NHL, and a lot of them went to Europe to play. That was like an option for me at some point, but I got very frustrated with always having to just work so much harder because of being a smaller guy. I'm sure there's still an element of that out there today. And at the end of the day, I was just, I was good, but I wasn't quite that good.
Right.
If I'm being really honest. I was always a factor. I was always one of the dominant players on all my team growing up. Usually I was in the top 2 or 3. In some cases, I'd be in the top player. But once I got into the Western Hockey League, I was just trying to get ice time. I feel I also kind of just didn't have the greatest luck when it came to the coaches and the team I got traded to. It was like when I got traded from Victoria to Kelowna, it was like the best first place team in the league to the worst place team in the league, and a lot of these guys were just fighting every game, and I felt like I was just being overlooked. And there's maybe some truth to that, or maybe a lot of that is just sour grapes on my end. But and again, I'm sure as we know how our memory works. Again, it was also such a long time ago now that I've just obviously long ago came to terms with the whole thing, how that all played out. And I mean, like anything, even like pursuing music, which I'm sure we'll get into a little later, those are both being a professional athlete or a, quote unquote rock star, or just a touring musician, is probably 2 of the most unattainable careers statistically to go after. I was never one to run away from that. I just chased my dreams. And then I was also just kind of realistic when it was clear that those things were. But yeah, no regrets.
Okay, so talk about that. How was the transition from hockey, getting as far as you could in high school, in the junior league, and then going into, you moved to LA?
Yep.
to pursue a career in music. How did that play out?
I was just always very uninhibited and never, if I wanted to do something, I would just do it. Moving to LA with what my skill level in music was at that time was probably a pipe dream, just in that I liked very difficult music. I was always attracted to progressive stuff like Rush and Yes and Genesis, and later on bands like Tool and Primus and prog rock, extremely technically difficult music. That was just stuff that I just simply couldn't play. but yet I understood it in a weird way mentally. So it was like I was very good in math and I understood the time progressions. That part came very natural to me. But I was also, 20 years old at the time when I moved to Los Angeles, and the one thing I kind of, unlike hockey where I was extremely disciplined, I was disciplined with music, but not in a way that in hindsight I look back that what's required to actually succeed. And I was also just interested in having a lot of fun and chasing girls, and I had a fairly decent day job, but we played a lot, we practiced a lot. And I just think the various groups that I was in, we were just kind of kids and we didn't really have a focus and we didn't or anything like that. And I don't know, maybe if I had stayed there, that might have come later, I'm sure. I was just missing a few ingredients in hindsight, really, if I'm honest. But again, no regrets. It was just something where I've just always pursued whatever that is. And if I had to go do it all over again, I would just do it probably the exact same way and tweak a few things. But I enjoyed all of it, to be honest.
Okay, well, let's actually pull one more element of your chart into this, because this is an interesting thing that you mentioned, that it wasn't necessarily you also had a day job, but you're pursuing something that was for the very performative element, to be on stage, to be recognized, to have that pursuit of like the highest level you could get in hockey, the highest level that you could get. You were performing in bands, you had acts, you were like actually getting gigs, you were actually on stage.
Yeah.
You had, I'm not going to say groupies necessarily, but you had women throwing themselves at you.
There were a few.
And this is obviously like in the late 80s, early 90s. And so there's big hair, big colorful outfits element to it. There's some glam rock, some makeup going on. This is all very Mars and Leo.
Prime hair metal era for sure.
Right. Yeah. And you do have Mars and Leo in the 10th house. 10th house is the house of recognition. It's not necessarily like your day job, but it's like your career aspiration. So that really ties in completely. But the fact that it wasn't like a practical pursuit. You weren't like, doing it to like...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of that speaks to just straight ego, maybe. I mean, I don't know if that makes sense astrologically or not.
For sure.
For those listeners who are unaware, even though you being my partner are very well versed in astrology, I certainly have an interest, and I've been affected by it by guilt by association, I guess. But I don't have a knowledge base in any way, like the way you just put that out and make that clear.
Sure.
But yeah, I think the ego is something that, I'm just thinking about this in real time right now, as being like, someone who's 58 years old, lived, a fairly full life to this point already. I think when you're young, much of our experience is ego-based. Much of what we pursue is ego-based. And I think that can have a negative connotation as well, where it's like, it probably doesn't put someone in a good light from a society perspective to say if you're pursuing something where you're up on stage and you're just getting recognition because you have a certain skill, be it an athlete or an actor or what. But I think it's deeper than that. I think just all of us, the human experience at a very young age, there's something in us that desires to be heard and to be understood. Even people who are introverts, I think, have a lot of times are some of the most gifted people in the world. We're extreme introverts. And I think we all have gifts. And it's like a lot of times people, I consider myself extremely fortunate that I had very supportive parents, and I was always given an opportunity to pursue whatever I wanted to. I worked hard when I moved to LA. I owned a Porsche at the time, which was like kind of a goofy story, but I was 20 years old and I had bought this Porsche from a car dealership because I saw it, and I was just sort of into Porsches from a hobbyist thing. And I would get the Auto Trader magazines and an old Camaro too, because I had one of those in high school. But it was like...
What color were they?
They were both red, actually, like
okay.
Indiana red and sort of a candy apple red for the Camaro.
Uh-huh. Mars and fire sign, I'm just going to throw that out there.
Okay, yeah. Fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, the ego thing is just... I bought this car, and then I sold it, and I moved to LA. And so I had a little bit of money when I moved down there, so I didn't have to till like a year and a half before I actually had to ask my parents for a small loan, which they they always did. They always helped me out wherever I could. Back to the just pursuing those kinds of careers. I think a lot of it, I think we're just not honest with each other as a society sometimes, where we people, it's not popular to say, yeah, my life has been ego driven. But I think it's just, there's a large element of that. I think it's just natural that everybody wants to be a movie star at one point when they're a kid. I think maybe not everybody, but certainly a lot of people. I mean, I say that loosely in the context of like, we all look up at this, and there's a reason we idolize famous people or people in magazines when we're young, and then you get older and you realize that there's a lot more to things, like having a small little sample size of life in pursuing that kind of a career in Los Angeles for, 7 years. It was like, I realized I have very firsthand knowledge about what it really takes to do that. And it's something where every story you hear of people that actually make it are people that they don't party, they don't go out to clubs so much. Not that they don't ever do that, but it's a different level of self-discipline. And
that's an interesting segue. And I'm going to bring in a few more elements of your chart to talk about what we just discussed, because you've actually got Mars in the 10th house, but it's opposite Saturn. And Saturn is the planet that rules like limitations, typically like anything that is in opposition of two planets means that you're not expressing the energy of that planet as robustly as you could. The limiting factor of Mars being opposite Saturn really indicates to me how, you said you went as far as you could in hockey, went as far as you could in music career, and then were limited by the hard work that was really required, the discipline that was required, and also just the reality of there's only so many spots in a hockey league or in the highest level of being a rock star. You can only go so far if you're not willing to just be like a fanatic in both of those cases. So I really see that in your chart.
One distinction between those two pursuits, I would say, is like when it came to hockey, the hard work element was 100% there. Like I was extremely disciplined. Like, the summer before my first junior camp, where the Victoria Cougars training camp, where I had absolutely no expectation of making the team, as there were only 2 spots really available, and there were probably 300 kids, from the younger leagues who were trying out for those 3 spots, and I eventually ended up getting one of the spots, even though I didn't play a whole lot. And I trained every day. I ran 6 miles a day. I was extremely disciplined in my training and all that. So I think what happened is like when the music thing happened, when I finally gave up, I got a little frustrated with hockey. I could have for sure gone and played in Europe and played for several seasons over there and probably made a reasonable salary and whatnot, as many of my friends went off and did who didn't make the NHL. So that was always an option. But again, I was very interested in music at the time. So I think when I went to California, sort of in a very general way, it was like I was sort of just letting go of something on one hand. And I don't know that it's not like we weren't working hard musically as well. Like we rehearsed probably 4 or 5 nights a week, and then we would play, I know we all had day jobs that we had to work, and then we had lives as well, and we liked to do things. And I was a 20-year-old, just kind of coming into my own, learning about being an adult and being on my own. So it was like, and then, fame is funny. Like, it's like some people just land in the right spot at the right time, and literally within months they are, known in the world. And then other people are extremely disciplined, hard workers for decades and never ever get into it or make it.
There's a huge element of luck and who and being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, and so that's why like with the music thing, it's like I don't even know that I ever really wanted to be famous per se, because once I got down there and I met some people, just rubbed shoulders with a couple people who were quite famous, and just sort of seeing the day-to-day what their lives were like. I had a girlfriend who was a sous chef, and she worked for like some very prominent actresses and whatnot, and actors. And it's like she would describe their day-to-day life to me, and it was like these people live in a complete fantasy land, and it's a bubble.
Right.
And I saw that right away. That became very clear to me at a young age, and I realized like, oh my God, I would never want that. Like someone who was like Michael Jackson level of famous or something like that. Just absolutely never in a billion years would I want it. I'd be the guy that would get an assault charge, because I'd like hockey punch a photographer for like
Sean Penn.
Probably.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that.
But fame can be a prison, like at a certain level. And you actually got enough of a taste of it to realize that pretty early on, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was like, so I don't know. Just think those years in LA for me were kind of like transitional. What I probably didn't know it at the time, but I was not really running away, but I was just I was letting go of hockey, which at the time it seemed like a very casual decision, but in order for me to actually do it, I had to literally leave the country and pursue an entirely different thing, which I did genuinely enjoy and have desires to do well at. I think anybody who can play an instrument that has enough courage to like go practice with some people in a room somewhere and then get up on stage and have people, even if it's one or two people, willing to pay money to to listen to them do what they're doing, you've already crossed a barrier that you're already in the 1% of all people who will ever play an instrument.
For sure.
So in that regard, I mean, I like, again, I have no regrets.
Let's talk about what you did after that, because you ended up owning your own business for several years and having your own flooring company, which is an interesting thing because Mars opposite Saturn, and Saturn is like, it rules buildings and concrete and structures and stuff like that. So you've got that interesting sort of, and you've got Saturn in Aquarius, which is the sign of innovation. So you were doing your own flooring company, and it was self-leveling concrete and these really neat patina stains, which is like using technology in a concrete environment, which is just symbolically really resonant there. But you did that for several years and had a really high-end list of clientele. There was a performative aspect to that as well. I remember because you had this company when I met you, and first of all, the floors were colorful and gorgeous and incredibly unique. So there was this artistic side to that.
Oh, without a doubt. Like, I mean, that was an era in the 90s when concrete floors were becoming a thing in retail spaces and large restaurants and whatnot. And I was one of the first people in Canada, for that matter, to go down that path. I was definitely one of a very short list of companies who were even doing that, at least at the early stages of that. That kind of stemmed out of the tile work thing, where when I lived in Los Angeles, my day job was setting tile and this Mexican clay tile and whatnot. So I had that skill, and then when I came back to Canada, that was just kind of a logical thing for me to do because it was I could do. And, I just set up a business, which is fairly straightforward, the paperwork, and formed a limited company. And then very much like hockey or very much like pursuing music, I never really did well in high school and stuff, like after school jobs and whatnot, like so many did. I worked for IKEA. I had a handful of other jobs. Got fired from one or two because not for doing anything malicious or wrong or being late or anything like that. It was just okay. So I opened the can. I got fired from a motorcycle shop because I kept over tightening the bolts. But I was 14 years old and they were making me set up 750 to 1100 cc street bikes right out of the crate, which I thought was absurd because I could barely ride a motorcycle myself, and yet I'm doing things that I thought a mechanic would be doing. But where the bike would come, the engine would be all already built, obviously, in the crate. But I'd have to put on the front and the rear tires, all the brake cabling and the clutch cabling. Very intricate kind of mechanically oriented work. And I had no mechanical prowess whatsoever at that age or interest in that. But it was a job. My friend's dad ran the shop. So, and I paid pretty well. So, as a 14-year-old, I was making, I think, $7 an hour or something. And going to school full-time and working full-time. And, so I had a couple of things like that. When I worked for IKEA, I tipped over a forklift once, and it was so they kind of had to fire me.
Right.
But it was just more, I never really fit into the whole employee thing. I would always come in, and after a week, I'd be like, hey, here's a better way to do this. Or I'd just go right to the boss and say, hey, could we try this maybe? And it's like nobody ever wanted to have ideas, and they're always like, just drive your forklift or just do this.
So I'm seeing a bit of what we were talking about before with the keywords of ego and, being pushy, wanting to have your thoughts heard even when you're 14 or never done anything before. And
I would have no problem just going up and talking to someone. I wouldn't stop and think should I or am I allowed to? I would just go say, hey, I think this might be a better, and I would do it respectfully, obviously. Right. And I just could never understand why there was always this pushback. And then obviously later in life as an adult, we look back and everybody has story that work environment or whatever. But where I was going with that is just like that, I decided to set up my own company because I already knew at that age that being an employee was not really, I wasn't really cut out to be an employee. I would prefer to just, and it was less about being a rebel against having an authority figure or a boss as it was just that I always liked the element of the unknown. Like I like the idea of doing it myself, like just going out and finding something. And then like when I would get a job and doing tile work, and like when I first moved back, it started out with the small tile jobs. And I was always such a perfectionist, like fanatically so, that it would, I might take twice as long as some other guy, but it was like, but they always got paid twice as much because it was like every tile was perfect, literally. And it was perfect according to me, which meant that no one else was going to see any flaws.
Okay, here's an amazing, I have to interject here because you have Venus in Virgo, and that is absolutely Venus in Virgo, is the perfectionist, the mechanically, doing it with your own hands and making it absolutely perfect. And, if it's perfect to you, then no one else will see the flaws. That's 100% Venus in Virgo areas.
Yeah.
And doing it your way, wanting to be your own boss, and not wanting to be part of the corporate structure is very much Mars, in the 10th.
Yeah, so that was always just kind of felt natural to me, and it was like, it didn't take long to just hustle up some work, and because I was good at it. And again, it sounds probably a little arrogant, but most things in life that I've tried to do, I've usually been pretty good at them. Like with sports and music, I'd say there's definitely a natural gift there, but I think even with other things though, like tiling is very mathematical, and I've always been very strong mathematically. Like I think I was one of those kids where I would solve a problem kind of the backdoor way, and the teacher would go, "Well, how would you get to that conclusion?" And I would explain it, and he'd go, interesting, that it works, but it's not the way we're supposed to do it.
Right.
And I mean, not all the time. I'm not trying to say I was some kind of math savant, but I'm just saying math was very comfortable to me, and that's why complicated music, like stuff with odd time signatures, that's 100% math. It's counting, and it's math, and it's repetition, but it's performance with something where your brain is focused in a separate way than what your fingers and your hands are doing.
Oh yeah.
And in a way that just doesn't, that most, like say pop music or that kind of stuff just doesn't require that skill.
Math and music are very, very connected. And that, I don't understand either of them.
Yeah.
I was like that with grammar and with sentences. Like I was, the kind of person who like just understood the way a sentence was supposed to work. And I was, like placing really high in writing classes and English classes from an incredibly early age.
It's like a structural thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I wouldn't necessarily be able to, diagram a sentence. That wasn't, I didn't think of it that way. It sounded right to me, or it didn't, and that just seemed early to me. But I'm a Virgo. I've got planes in Virgo, so that makes sense. But let's bring this up to the present day, because you had your company doing floors for a while. That ended, for a couple of different reasons. Part of which is because it's incredibly hard on your back, and that.
It was just after years of tiling and doing that. The downside is, especially when you're doing the work yourself, it's like, especially once I got into the concrete staining part of it, it was like that's very much being an artist is what that was. Mm-hmm. It was like knowing how certain things react in a very unpredictable way, where you're creating something that's a unique one-off every single time, and your client has to approve it so you can get paid. In order to approve it, they just have to like it. So it's there's a high degree of, I think, communication that has to go on in that kind of a space.
There's an element of unpredictability too, though.
Yeah, there is. And then but it was just time. Like, as you know, I had a lot of my lower back was slowly just getting trashed, and I know people who just stuck it out another decade in that injury who are all having lower back fusion procedures. Nice. And so I think I just dodged a bullet. It was just time to get out and try something different.
So bringing that up to the present day, I know that you recently came out of COVID with a brand new career. Let's talk a bit about that and how that fit with Mars and Leo, because I think it really is a great example.
Okay. I'm not sure what that means, but
first of all, using your personal contact. So that's Leo is a very gregarious. It's like a there's you're the king of the jungle, but it's also there's a pride of lions around you, and you definitely are an amazing networker. You've got a lot of friends who you can always call for references. Even people you knew 20 years ago would be like more than happy to give you glowing references. And
that's one thing I've always maintained my whole life. I think I got that from my dad. Like my dad, who was always, he was the opposite of like a networker, but he just instilled in me certain qualities. I think that the end result of that is just realizing the value of people and I've rarely met somebody that I couldn't make at least tolerate me but generally like me. To say I'm a likable guy is probably a fairly accurate description, just in general.
Yeah. That's not ego. That's just true. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I'd kind of put that out there. I try to be a positive person. I'm generally, have a smile on my face. And even when I don't, it's usually more of just those little quirks we all have those little things about our personality we probably don't like as much.
But you genuinely care about other people too. Like this is, it's not just about like, oh, everyone likes me. It's our positive person. Back
to your segue, it's like, I just one of my good friends, Tim Austin, who, may or may not be one of guests one day, who knows? But he's kind of become a very close friend of mine. In the years we play hockey together, we met downstairs called Relish, to be frequent. And as I've met many very good friends down there. But he has, he's worked in the hotel industry for quite some time. And obviously during COVID, coming out of COVID, they were short, like many businesses, couldn't get staff and whatever reasons, people wanting to go back to work. And I thought, maybe it'd be fun to just do something different and just go be an employee somewhere. It wasn't really even about the money because it was just basically a fairly entry-level position as a bellman at the Hilton here in Vancouver. But I just jumped on it. I thought, let's just do this and get back into the mix. I hadn't worked for quite a while prior to that. And in hindsight now, I can say that that's worked out really well because a lot of the my people skills in life just were 100% just suited for that job. And like my bell captain will tell me all the time, he's like, the job itself is something you can teach anyone in a couple of weeks, but the interpersonal skills is something you either have it or you don't. And I think he's probably pretty close. So yeah, I did that for like a year and a little bit. Then an opening came up in the food and beverage department. They had a bartender spot that was open, and I had some brief little stints. I mean, I definitely worked in bars a lot before as a musician, not so much as a bartender, but I kind of just talked my way into that job. And then like anything, it just, I just took it on as a challenge, and I had a few anxiety dreams prior to once I got the job about what did I bite off more than I could chew, because I really wasn't a bartender, to be clear about that. Then in a couple of weeks, I had it pretty much figured out, and now it's like I'm their star guy there. And by that I mean, they have me closing every night. It's something that they placed a lot of responsibility in my hands, and I enjoy it. The money is a little bit better up there as well, so that was kind of a motivation behind it as well. And things are going well, and I never even thought about it, but something I would have had tons of opportunities in the past to go down that line of work had that been something of interest to me. Having friends who own breweries and restaurants and all kinds of things. Yeah, like many things in life, it's just, I think, a timing thing where it's something I can do now that can use my personal skills to represent the hotel in a positive way, make sure people have a pleasant and also safe experience at the hotel. It doesn't tax my body quite in the way that setting tile would.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It highlights your personality, your flair for talking to people.
You are sort of on a stage and you're performing, you're making drinks, and we make a lot of fancy cocktails there. So it's like anything, just cracking open a bottle of beer to some 7 ingredient drink. But yeah, no, I enjoy it. I'm kind of happy where I'm at right now. And it's turned out to be a very unique little job.
Interesting. Let me just pull this back into a couple of elements to your chart, because you've also got Mars squared Jupiter and Neptune. So those are hard aspects. There's definitely been ups and downs in your career, but Jupiter is the planet of expansion and Neptune is the planet of illusions, but also glamour. So it could be like a positive or a negative. It also rules alcohol, which is interesting because of bartending. You've got Neptune in the first house in Scorpio. So you are a Scorpio. You've got Mercury in Scorpio. That is the element of your personality that's deep, inquisitive, probing, sarcastic, all of those things.
Check.
Right, exactly. These harsh aspects with Mars could have been limiting factors in some of your career path, opposite Saturn and square Neptune. So there could have been an element of delusion of thinking that you could do something and then having the realities come up against that, and then that limited your ability to move forward in those career paths. But then the fortunate aspect of that, there's that square to Jupiter, and Jupiter is the planet of expansion. limitation. So, you've got this push-pull of limitation versus expansion.
Yeah.
And in the end, you've managed to carve out this niche where you're putting the spotlight on other people, giving them a wonderful experience in the bar and making them feel like they're having a great conversation with this really interesting person, and you're making them feel special and like,
Sure. Yeah. I think definitely have I kid around. I've got a good buddy, Leo, who's a bartender there as well, who, shout out to Leo. Mm-hmm. But he's 21, and some of the other servers there are quite young. So being more of my vintage, you can, I just feel like, and a lot of our guests are probably my age or much older, a lot of them even. They're just people who have, a lot of people who have, say, retired, and now they're spending their retirement time and money going on cruises, coming to see our fabulous city. So I think at the end of the day, in a scenario like that, I just genuinely have more to talk to. I know more. Yeah. I've had more life experience than a lot of our other staff, which just allows me to share that with a person. I can kind of read a person, and and I can pull stuff out of the past that they would probably remember that I was always interested in at the time, even, or be it political or just. I try to stay away from politics and religion just for obvious reasons. Yeah. As far as I just know that. As divisive as getting like that, I just stay clear of subjects.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll pipe in a little bit now and then. It's something,
You've got a deep well of information and life experience to draw from to make a conversation with just about any kind of person.
Yeah. And I've been pretty socially engaged for like years now. So, I mean, as you know, we followed a lot of U.S. politics and just global politics like very closely. I know I personally, and I'm sure you have to a degree, just I've sort of modified my take on how the world works now, and I just realized that a lot of it doesn't really matter if it's a Democrat or a Republican as a sitting president. It's like whoever's in power is going to do all the things that are for them and not for the people, and that's just the world. And I'm kind of a realist when it got sort of thing now. Yeah. And to be honest with you, I just don't really have an interest in it the way I used to, because it's like,
just want to live your life.
Just want to live my life, and it doesn't concern me, and there's nothing I could do realistically that's going to affect any of that anyway. Sorry to all you people out there with picket signs in your hands. Yeah, and maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I'm not saying that you can't affect change in the world. I don't mean all. I just mean it. It's like I don't have an interest in doing. My interests now are preserving a path for our future, so that when we both eventually retire, we can live and enjoy that phase of our life.
Well, that's probably a good place to wrap it.
Sounds good.
This has been an amazing conversation. Thanks so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
I'll thank our listeners. This has been the Starzology Astrology Podcast. This has been our spotlight on Mars in Leo. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for getting this far through the episode. I just want to take a moment to tell you about the two main options of my astrology services. So the first one is coaching. If you are an aspiring astrologer, and by that I mean someone who's perhaps a hobbyist astrologer, or someone who's learning astrology, or a student, or you've got a few books and you've been doing it for a while, but perhaps you need a little bit of help to bring it all together, then maybe getting some astrological coaching from me would be the answer for you. The astrology coaching I offer is a 1-hour session on Zoom, and it's tailored to answer your particular questions. For example, if you have issues with natal chart readings, we can go there. Or if you're having problems working with your forecasting, we can go there. Or even basic astrology stuff, or even getting yourself organized for your astrology business. The idea is that astrological coaching will answer your particular questions. It's tailored specifically to you and where you are in your astrological journey. And I'm happy to help you out with some guidance about how you can get going, what to focus on, and what to dismiss. So that would be the astrological coaching for people trying to learn astrology. The second astrological service I offer is consultations. So this is for someone who perhaps doesn't know anything about astrology, but they just want to have their chart read or get their chart done. Call it what you will. So once more, this is a 1-hour consultation over Zoom. I will interpret your chart, tell you about the main features, tell you about where the energy is flowing, and all the rest of what is entailed in a thorough natal chart interpretation. I can also add in some forecasting in there too, bearing in mind we only have 1 hour. So just in summary, I've got coaching for people who want to learn astrology, and I've got consultations for those who want to get an astrology reading done. I'm Alison Price from Starzology.com. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.